Okay. I believe we are now live, but there's just a slight delay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Sorry, I plugged my webcam in today. It stopped working.
No problem.
All right. Why can't I? I can't really hear anything though. Let me see. Okay. Oh, you know what it is? I have Skype lower. That's why. Okay. Hi, everybody. Waiting for people to come into the group so you guys can see. Um, Yeah, I think when we're in the Facebook group, the description should actually give you a link. So what's different on the Facebook group, because we just came over from doing the insider chat on YouTube, is we will
Yeah.
not be able to see your names unless you give eCam permission because of Facebook privacy. So there's a link in the description box if you guys want to use that, so you don't just pop up as an invisible user. But if you don't mind, it's okay. And we have Dr. Cooper here. We just finished. Okay, here we go. My copy, and I'm a little notepads in it. Eloquent Rage by Dr. Brittney Cooper. And I'm really excited to have you because, again, you have had your hands over every book that we have read in the Facebook group. And, I hope y'all grab your syllabus. These are syllabuses for syllabi for Voice in the South. And this is how we do it in Sula. But yours, actually, Samantha Brown, I couldn't get her. She didn't have the time to join in because she's in a different time zone. But she did a really, really good job on the syllabus for your book. But I think that's because you gave so much to pull from. We've had so much discussion. So we actually already have the questions pre-submitted.
Okay.
We are going to go ahead and load them on the screen and go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Okay, so this is actually with regards to your essay, Love No Limit Towards a Black Feminist Future in Theory. Okay, so the question that was submitted said that they, in your essay, you call for Black feminists to tend to our own theoretical ground rather than starting from a place where we are defending Black feminism. How did that set of ethics shape your approach to Eloquent Rage? I'm going to try and make this smaller.
That's a great question, and wow, y'all are deep in my catalog with Love No Limit. I love that. So I was tired of apologizing for the kinds of conversations that Black women should get to have. Black feminism is our ground and it's our space and it's about our experience. And there are so many things that we need to be able to say that are a way to meld our politics to our lived reality. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, when I was working on Eloquent Rage, the first two chapters. So the first chapter is the I think it's capital B, capital F. The second chapter is strong female leads. I may have them back.
The first chapter is the problem with sex.
Oh yes, that's the introduction. Okay. That's right. And so then those next two chapters, the editor initially wanted me to switch them around and wanted me to start with the strong female leads chapter, which begins with a line, I have a complicated relationship with white women. And I was like, I absolutely will not begin a book about Black women with a line about white women. And so that was like my way of fighting for space, because there's this sort of thinking in the publishing industry that books for Black women don't sell and that the people who buy books are white women. And that is why there is this, there's this demand to sort of cater to white people, even when you're writing books about race or books about Black folks. And I was like, did people forget that Black women read books and that we think in community with each other about our experience? So I'm going to trust that Black women have my back, and that if I write a book to us and for us that centers our experience, that we will be able to have the conversations we need to have. And that's about not about our experience.
Sorry, so my phone.
So that's about not being on the defensive and about taking up the space and not apologizing for it, and about trusting that any other person that should be a part of the conversation will come along, but that I don't have to spend time justifying or arguing with or proving that Black women actually matter, and that we get to be at the front. The invitation, the lead in is we're talking about Black girls' experiences, and Black feminism taught me that, but it taught me more fundamentally that when we see each other and when we ride for and look out for each other, that we will also hold each other. And so Black women have bought this book and they have supported it, I think in part because I'm unapologetic in, who I ride for and who I love. And I try not to sugarcoat that. And I try to make it clear that I'm not trying to make life easy for white women or trying to explain us to white women or I'm not interested in any of that. And so, it was a gamble and I'm glad I took it. And I think it has paid off. So.
Yes. And I think the follow-up has to do with saying, were there times when you felt the impulse to defend Black feminism rather than articulate what it means to you? And where does that show up in the book for you?
Throughout my career, we learned early on. So when me and my crew started the Crunk Feminist Collective in 2010, and we were doing all of this blogging, we learned really early that we actually got the most clicks and views when we wrote about two things. One was Tyler Perry. And we would be railing again, critiquing Tyler. And look, I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with the man. It's mostly a hate relationship with his work and his art. And so I would just be railing against him, and that would always get Black women into a tizzy. The other thing is when we would write pieces about how white women were racist, and we would break records every single time we did it. And we just got irritated about that because we were like, why is it that when we write stories that center Black women and girls, that center the things that Black women are doing, the world we're trying to build, that doesn't get us clicks, but anger towards white women gets us clicks.
Mm-hmm. Outrage.
Yeah, that people were very comfortable with Black women doing their feeling for them and doing the emotional labor of critiquing white supremacy, critiquing patriarchy. And while they're, in one place I wrote about that as like the cheap high, like as the cheapest high. It'll get you high, but it won't sustain you. And the crash is real, right? Because you will do all of that emotional labor to talk about why white women are raggedy. And I think we can all in the main. And then the challenge, of course, was that with that, I'm feeling a little bit of echo on my end.
I turned my volume up. That's why.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. The challenge with that is that where was the point where we could actually say the stuff that mattered to us? Where was the point where we could talk about what kinds of formulations of the world Black women were actually interested in making? And so where did we talk about a politics of love? Where did we have the space to talk about friendships or relational issues with Black women? Where did we have the space to sort of struggle with Black men around what did it mean to show up for them and love them and ride for them politically in a world where we didn't always get reciprocity? What did it mean to say that Black women get treated in political conversations as though the only intervention we have ever made in 100 years of thinking is to say that race and gender matter, to say that intersectionality matters. And Black feminism is a much richer tradition than that. And it has critiques of power. Mm-hmm. And it has things to say about knowledge systems. And it has things to say about how Black women ought to, think about our own stories and how we ought to think about caring for ourselves. And it has things to say about how we build families and how we build relationships. And all of that work is good theoretical work. And it gets reduced in general conversation to the Black girls are here to remind us that race still matters. And it's like, okay, I mean, that's really 101 level stuff, but it's super basic. So
yes. And we hope to definitely explore more of that, through our readings, which is why we keep trying to do Black feminist tinged things. Because I think, on this idea, the anti-Black feminist movement on YouTube will be very, against the idea of Black feminism, but then still use the rhetoric of Black feminism. And I don't think they realize that the canon of the Black feminist theory is so broad and deals with all these things they're discussing.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question was, what parts of the book did you have to keep out, and what part of the book did you fight to keep in?
Oh, interesting. Let me say that the benefit of having a Black woman agent is that everything I wanted to say, I kept it in. There wasn't any, I guess the little fights we had were really the moments when I wanted to go more academic and less pop. So I was really insistent upon those conversations around neoliberalism and the way that I thought that it showed up in the book around this conversation about empowerment and self-help. Because, I both think Oprah's dope, and I also am deeply skeptical of that self-help narrative. Just read these books and work on yourself and things will be fine. It's that's not how we white supremacy cannot be overcome, with the retreat into the self and healing all, there's no we don't have the model yet to heal the structural levels of trauma that Black women have experienced, even though we increasingly have the language to recognize that trauma and healing should be a priority. So I wanted to say those kinds of things. And there was this push, like, it was this thing, right? It was that I don't ever think in my public writing that being accessible means you have to dumb down. And there is this view that to write accessibly is to write in this poppy, non-serious, very surface way. And, and I respect my audience. I know sisters are deep. And so I know on the one hand that you don't have to have a PhD to understand feminism and Black feminism in particular. And on the other hand, I know that I don't have to insult your intelligence in order to bring you to the table to have a conversation. And so sometimes I would be struggling with the press around, we actually can take that a level deeper, and the audience can handle it.
Yes. The person that submitted that question was thanking you for your vulnerability and reminding Black girls and women that we are still in the process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't like that sort of performance of like, we have it all together. This is why I tell people that I don't really give advice or like self-help. I mean, look, I go to therapy. I have homegirls. I check in with them. They very frequently disagree with me about things. Like, they're unimpressed. They're proud of me, but unimpressed with me, which is, I think, the right approach to have.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm all about that.
Okay, so we're going to get into book-specific questions here. I'm sorry, I set this up because I thought I was going to be on the other. I'm putting questions on the screen, but they're blocking you because I thought I was going to be on the other side of the screen. All right, so this has to do with your quote. I believe it's on page 96 of your book, for those of you who have your books out. And the quote was, "What does it mean to build a world in which Black women and Black girls are safe?" So per that quote, they wanted to know, what current policies are you supporting that help create a safer space for Black women in America?
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is good. Oh, and it's so good in this moment when our politics are so terrible. Mm-hmm. Look, I think that we have to be thinking a lot about the Black women's maternal mortality crisis, which we've known about for a long time. And we have an infant mortality crisis in this country as well. Disproportionate amounts of Black babies die before the age of 1. The same with Black mothers. I love the policies that are coming out that are banning hair discrimination for Black women, because it's one of the most intersectional kinds of conundrums that we've had. I think that we need some policies that deal with making daycare and childcare affordable, housing affordability. So there was a great piece at the Washington Post now about 4 years ago that talked about that. When we think about the carceral state, very frequently we're talking about Black men. But if we think about the problem of eviction and we think about our affordable housing crisis in this country, then we begin to think about the challenges of Black women. And so that's those sisters out in Oakland who have been taking over houses and doing organizing around that, and so protecting them. Certainly, we've got to think about healthcare issues, but I don't just want us to think about affordable healthcare. I want us to pump a lot of money into research around why Black women are disproportionately represented in autoimmune diseases. So we're in this moment where we're talking about, where we're all dealing with the coronavirus crisis, and some of the key drugs that the Trump administration is touting as treating corona are actually used to treat lupus patients. And like Black women are the primary demographic that suffers with lupus. So that means that when we're talking about a drug shortage, we're literally talking about a drug shortage that directly affects and impacts Black women disproportionately. So those are the kinds of policies that I think need to begin to matter. And I also think that when we begin to think about what does it mean to address violence against women, that we've got to have a way to think about that isn't rooted in the carceral state, right? That isn't rooted in so often when we're talking about violence in our communities, Black women and also brown women often don't report domestic violence because they're afraid of how the carceral state is going to break up their families, remove children, remove partners. And so we've got to have some community solutions that are not about policing and jails, but that fundamentally value Black women's safety, Black girls' safety above all else. And so those are just some of the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's a hefty topic. Okay, so the next question
yes.
is on the first page of chapter 2, capital B, capital F, you discuss how men are taught to desexualize outspoken women.
Ah, yes.
What thoughts or advice would you give mothers of sons on how to deter that line of thinking in our sons?
Oh yes, very good. Yes, when I was in college, we called it, being friendable or fuckable. Now I think, folks say friend zoning or whatever, and I hate it. But oddly enough, the solution I think is for mothers of sons to encourage their sons to actually build friendships with girls and women that are not based on sex.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that black boys and black men have to actually have relationships where they see black women as people and not just people that they're considering whether they want to have sex with them or not, but people who they value the relationships with them. And so they just value their opinions. They think that women have something to bring to the table in terms of how they think about things. I mean, my general sense is that everybody in the world needs a black homegirl. And that's true for black boys. It's true for black girls. It's true for white girls. They just can't always be trusted. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is, the person had an audiobook, so they couldn't necessarily pull up the page that we're referencing. But you wrote one of your earlier chapters about women deciding if our desire for the house, the car, the kids, and the husband are results of patriarchal influences. It's interesting because we talked about this with When Chicken Has Come Home to Roost, because Joan Morgan also discusses this, right? And so the person's saying that they begin to think about their own desires and they feel conflicted because I would like to believe that these are innate desires. So today, do you desire these things? The house, the car, the kids, and the husband, etc. And if you do you still believe it's a patriarchal influence?
Look, I have the house and I have a car. And I have a boo. So, look, we'll see if I make him my husband. I mean, we're figuring it out.
Yes.
But, yeah, look, I mean, sure. I think that there's a part of me that understands that as like the completion of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. That, many of us understand our families that it's a mode of achievement, that to have done everything right means that you get the partner, that if you want kids, that you get kids. I'm 39, so my sort of window around children is actively receding, and I'm still fairly ambivalent about them because I love my life. Mm-hmm. But there was a moment in my life when I was in my 20s where I thought that I would like get married at 24 and then I was going to have these babies spaced out every 3 years. So like I was going to have my first baby at 28. And
I
then
have the same timeline. I'm definitely 35 and very single.
That's totally it, right? Because so that's like, who is this woman that was going to have a husband and 3 kids and be, because I hate cooking for myself every day during this crisis.
Right. Doing dishes is like a no.
I'm like, why are there continually dishes in the sink? But the larger point for me is less about saying that the desire is wrong, because that's not actually the argument. The argument is just reminding us that our desires are political, right? And here's why that matters, because we live in a world where brothers often like to date white girls and they can date who they want. But they like to tell us that it's not a political decision. Oh, I don't have any problem with black women. She's just who I chose, right? And we all know that there's a whole bunch of politics that are shaping desirability, that are shaping that choice, and they don't want to acknowledge it. But if we're going to actually go there, then we've got to be honest about the way that politics also shapes all of our desires. And so you can't build a world rooted in the idea that the black family is a failure. That's slavery. And then move forward to the 1960s and the federal government writes the Moynihan Report and they say the problem in black communities is that black women are too powerful and they're matriarchs and they're not allowing men to lead. And then that shapes the way that our parents come to think about what it means to build a family. So we're told that every version of a family that we have is a failure. Of course, all of us overachieving black girls who read books and are in virtual, spaces like this are like, how can I correct the wounds of the past? Well, I'm going to fix myself so that I'm not from a broken home and a broken relationship. I'm going to do it right. Just like I got these A's in school, I'm going to get these A's in relationship building. And if I do it right, then I get the man, I get the kids, we make money because I have degrees, I get the house. And I'm like, well, what happens if you arrive at your life and it just doesn't work out that way? Feminism says that's not a failure. It's an opportunity to reimagine that there are other things to want.
I say this so often.
But you can't get there if you don't acknowledge that all of the ways that we come to think about ourselves are shaped by the things that we've seen around us, what they say is possible, what they say isn't possible, right? What we celebrate and what we don't, because basically we don't actually have any social celebrations for folks, any adults, unless they're rooted in marriage and children, right? You get graduations, and then after graduation, if you don't get married and you don't have kids, unless you throw big birthday bashes, no one ever comes together again to celebrate you in your life.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a way that our society is structured to tell you which things have value by telling you which things are worthy of other people stopping their lives, spending their money and inconveniencing themselves to celebrate you. And that's all about marriage and children. So, of course, those are political constructs that we desire because they tell us that we are commencing through life appropriately. Right. And so we got to have a narrative around that because we know that Black girls get married later. When we get married at all, we partner later, we have babies later. And so we spend a lot of time feeling like we're failures. And I'm saying that we just, whatever you want, if that's the family you really want, nothing wrong with that. The question is just you having some sense of where that comes from so that we can keep on building a world where there are lots of ways to show up in it and be happy.
And it's so true, like, even for me, like, in therapy, my therapist having to remind me to celebrate the small things because I don't celebrate myself. But because I have all these, and I think a lot of Black women in general, I think this is innate for people in general, but an extra layer for Black women is feeling like we can only celebrate ourselves in our adulthood around these particular markers. And when we don't make these markers, there's this level of shame. And as someone as myself who might have a little bit more radical politics around this, I constantly have to remind people to not use our radical politics as a means to shame others who haven't gotten where we're at yet, right? Because there's a lot of untethering and there's a lot of it's difficult when society is constantly telling you one thing, that reimagining is very necessary, but there's an amount of it's labor and it's work and you can't just expect people to pick up and meet you there.
I mean, look, I like to tell people one of my secret favorite pastimes is that I read romance novels, which clearly means that I'm totally into happily ever after because it's so simple, right? Like you do right, the person sees you, you find your soulmate. Like, look, I love it, truly. I just also know the kind of Black girl I am, and I know that I'm 39 and I'm partnered and I don't have kids, but I have like a banging career. And, and I'm not at some point in my life, really, when I graduated with my PhD at 28 and I arrived at my apartment in my new city. And I was like, wow, I got my PhD, but none of this other stuff, I don't know if it's going to happen. And I did decide in that moment that however my life was going to be shaped or turn out, that I was going to be happy, whether the man showed up or the kids showed up or they didn't. Mm-hmm. And I'm inviting everyone to just recognize that you can decide that you're going to be happy however this thing goes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get spicy here because you made a comment about the 94 crime bill.
Okay.
And the dating pool. So per your discussion of the impact of the 94 crime bill on Black women's dating pool.
Yeah.
What, if any, changes do you see with our current dating pool?
Ooh. Well, look, it's hard out here for a pimp. It's hard. And it's, I think a couple of things. One, I think that structurally I think the state has disappeared a couple of generations of Black men. I mean, I think that's a perennial part of the problem for sisters who date men. But I also think that the other thing that happens in the aftermath of the 94 crime bill, I mean, we're hip hop generation, right? Or, I identify as hip hop generation. And so part of the thing that I also talk about in the book is that you start to see this just deep narrative of distrust emerge in the music, which is so one of the tests that I do with my students, always just did it with my students last week. I say, what are the love songs of your generation? Your ballads, I will put this on a mixtape for somebody that came out in the last 5 to 10 years. And they literally can never name me more than 1 or 2 songs. And that's happening now when y'all are talking about having a reemergence of R&B and you still don't really have that many ballads. You're still going back to the old stuff. And to me, that says a world where you have ballads and love songs that brothers sing is a world where brothers have some way to tap into an emotional landscape of vulnerability. that's why I keep using it as an example, because old love music, brothers will be like, baby, I did you wrong. I'm sorry. I messed up. Or I love you. Or you're beautiful. Ain't no other girl like you. Now all the songs are just, I want to fuck, girl. Like, I want to turn violent and stuff. And then I want to put your
Period. Or,
stuff.
you know,
Like,
this is what my
you know,
pussy can do.
I want you to
Period. Yeah.
kind of acrobatic. And then I want you to let my boys smash too. Like, that's not a love song. And I'm not mad if you want to fuck and then you want to let your boys smash, provided consent is part of the conversation. There is no shaming here, but that's a real limited intimacy landscape from which to like build relationships, right?
Yes.
And so that's the conversation is, and what I like, what I tell, black girls are always asking me a version of this, and what's hard is when the black girls who ask me are like 23, 24, because I'm like, oh, this doesn't get better for a while. Like, it gets better, kind of. I mean, if you look statistically, what I ultimately end up saying to people is statistically we do partner. We just partner later than most people, and typically we're partnering after 35. So when you know that, then you got to put some buttresses in place to deal with the loneliness and all of the other stuff that happens in that period between when you're really wanting to get serious in your 20s and about the time that it's in many cases going to work out in your 30s. So I spent my entire 20s just like alone and in terrible situationships and, and feeling deeply lonely. And it just took me a while to get to the place where I felt like I had some agency and some control. And that really didn't happen until my 30s. So,
Yeah. So we're going to move into your discussions around the church.
Okay.
This one's a hefty one. This is a hefty, long question. Okay.
All right.
So it's based on your quote. Black girls and black women, particularly those who have had any sustained encounter with Christianity, are often immobilized by the hyperregulation of their sexuality from both the church and the state. Then further along in the chapter, you say, Black women are often robbed of our agency to build healthy, intimate lives. In trying to be intentional on teaching girls about their agency over their body and sexuality, and this person actually works within like a theological center teaching young girls, and they feel as though, they're trying to be intentional about it. Unfortunately, they get very different messages from their mothers.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on how to bridge this gap, and how can they continue to help the girls they lead make sense of their sexuality and spirituality within the church setting?
Woo, you're doing God's work, sis, and it's really hard. And so I don't have any easy solutions, but what I would say is that our job is to give people the frameworks to think about their experience and to plant seeds. What is important is that you're helping these girls to build a counter discourse to the discourses that they have. And that you might have to say to them, like, have a real frank conversation about how there are different generational narratives around this because, our parents came up in a different moment with a different set of social expectations. And so they are thinking about it differently. And they're thinking about it differently because they're thinking about it in the context of fear. They're thinking about it in the context of being afraid that God is going to judge them or not bless them. Parents are also very afraid about sexuality because they're afraid that their kids are going to get pregnant. And, that's the thing that they're most worried about. And so conversations about pleasure and consent and agency and choice and all of those things just become super limited. One way that I think one can inspire empathy in these girls is to recognize that for many Black women, part of the reason they engage sex in the way that they do is because there's actually a lot of trauma and violence around sex for Black women that goes unacknowledged. And it shapes their fear about the entire conversation. But I think it's just super important to be a person who argues before these girls that there's another way to do this, there's another way to think about it, and that you can actually look in the biblical text and find that there is more complexity. And I think the last thing is to really just build in them the confidence to recognize that their own relationship with God matters, that there's space in that relationship for their questions, where they get to grapple and they get to come to their own conclusions, and that there is, that there's room for them to sort of see themselves in the text and in the life of the church, right? In ways that we typically are not thinking about with Black girls. Because once you give them the confidence to sort of own how they're thinking about it, sometimes we transform our parents in our ownership of what's true for us. And so that's what we can do for little girls is let them know that their own truths matter. Even though I don't know that they always need to battle their parents. They just need to know what's true for them and how they're going to move and why that true, so one of my nieces, one of my homegirl's daughters is queer. And, my homegirl calls me. She's like, my kid is queer. What do I do about this? I don't know how I feel about it. And I was like, she's fine. You need to be fine. And so, she was like, well, I talked to her and I said, well, how are you reconciling this with your relationship with God? And her kid was like, God is cool. Like, me and God are cool. And she was like, it helped her to calm down because she was like, if my kid what do I look like telling my kid that God hates them, right? When they're like, I'm good and I know God loves me. And so that kid, she was 15 at the time. And so her own confidence about who she is in the world helped her mama to just kind of chill out and get centered.
That's good. Okay, so the next question is per your quote. The same choice we make as young people became the same choice that make us miserable 20 years later.
Ah, yes.
Are there other areas in your life where you felt as if the choices you made as a youth caused you misery years later?
I mean, there was that party, the Dirty South Players Ball that I refused to go to as a college freshman because I was writing a paper for poli-sci. And 20 years later, people are still talking about that party. Like, look, I was a kid who was like, I got to get these A's because I'm trying to make it out of the hood and I'm trying to, be somebody my family can be proud of. And so that meant that I wasn't trying to have a lot of fun. It meant that I wasn't trying to be too adventurous or risky because I was very worried that my entire life would fall apart if anything went wrong. And I wish that I had a little bit more space to kind of just chill out. And not put as much pressure on myself to be an achiever. But in general, because now I think I'm living in the aftermath of all those choices, not just the choice around kids. There are days when I wish that I just got knocked up in my 20s because it might have been an embarrassment then maybe, but the kid problem would have been solved. At 39, it's a really different conversation to have because you don't just get knocked up at 39, not typically. Yeah. You spent your life perfecting how not to, so it's you can't just accidentally arrive at it, and if you're all ambivalent about it, then it's harder. So I wish that some of that, I wish that maybe I hadn't had everything sort of fall into place because part of you grow through disruptions and unexpected events, and I was so deeply invested in controlling my life so that everything went according to plan. And now I'm sort of locked into that plan.
Yes. It's a real thing I was literally, this has been a reoccurring theme amongst the older women in my life that I should, on my YouTube channel, do a series about Black women fertility because there is kind of this question. It's like, I've really been good at not getting pregnant. And, now I'm of age and how do I even know if I can? Because I've never even attempted to. So what's the process? What are our options? And
I think you should do that. I think, and the earlier that conversation happens, the better.
Yes. Okay. So this next question was one of the most popular talking points. Okay. Sorry, from the group about your commentary on exceptionalism. And a lot of people felt connected to this. So the person says they love how you address the myth of Black exceptionalism in the Favor Ain't Fair chapter. And I think Favor Ain't Fair was almost everyone's favorite chapter.
Oh, good. Okay.
So as Black women with credentials and accomplishments, we're curious on how you toe the fine line of acknowledging the privilege that may have aided in your achievement and also giving yourself the space to be confident and recognize your own hard work.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm super proud. Let me be clear and happy to pop my collar. And frequently, if people don't acknowledge, then I will be like, you have not read enough to have this conversation with me. I'm not telling you that you can't be proud. I'm saying that you've got to have an acknowledgement. That pride doesn't have to come, though, from being exceptional. The pride is in the accomplishments themselves, in the achievement of the degrees, in the way that you move around in the professional spaces, and in the ability, so I just signed a new book deal, and it was a big book deal, and I, called a friend, a couple of friends, homegirls, and I was like, I've never seen that much money in my life, right? that was the being proud. It wasn't about how it was relative to another person's book deal. It was the thing about being, it was the thing about growing up the way that I grew up, coming from the family that I came from, and then looking at my bank account and seeing like a sum that no one in my life has ever seen that much money, right? That's the thing, and so I'm proud. But what I know is that, and what I wish for, is a world in which all of the other kids who were in those classes with me had the same set of opportunities to really show up in their fullness. And I think we can acknowledge those things and also say that, yes, I believe that I made the best of the choices and options handed to me. And I think that I get to celebrate that. I just don't think it makes me better than anybody. That's it.
Yes. Okay. We'll keep moving along because we're getting low on time here.
Okay.
So this is centered around, in one of your later chapters, you discussed having to choose between being Black and a woman. And I think this is a common theme amongst Black feminist theory, the intersection of Black woman identity.
Yeah.
They think that so when I think of other intersectionalities Black women have and are constantly in a mental space where they may find it difficult to choose, besides having to choose between being Black and a woman, what are some other identities you may struggle with having to choose?
Oh, interesting. Sometimes there's a struggle, like if I'm home between, it's that moment where I'm a professor, I have a PhD, and I'm listening to a conversation that goes against my politics or that, flies in the face of things that I know. Do I just chill out and be like, yeah, we just chatting it up, we just talking? Or do I say, here's a book list, because maybe you want to sort of reimagine that, right? Because nobody likes that girl, right? So sometimes it's the like, do I just, hang out with the family and allow them to kind of chop it up and not do my whole professor thing? Or when do I show up to do that? Sometimes I'm navigating in the workspace. My white colleagues get to just go by their first name at work, and other grad students are just, referring to my colleagues by first name. And, and I like to be down to earth, but I'm like, call me Dr. Cooper, because there's a power and authority thing that needs to happen there. And so that's hard, because I'm like, I want to be down to earth and cool and connected too, but see, then people cross the lines, they don't have good boundaries. So like, I feel like those are all, it's really at this point a question about when to pull out the credentials and to be the professional self. Even figuring that out in relationships sometimes can be interesting too. When I was doing online dating some years ago, I had a whole meltdown about whether or not I should put professor or teacher in my dating profile.
Oh man, while I was applying for my PhD, Takia, who was helping me with my application, informed me that if I got into school, my dating pool was going to get a lot smaller.
I mean, listen, that's a real thing. And so I think I put educator, because I was like, if I put professor, no one's gonna date me, right? And so it's, those are the moments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I believe we are moving into the pop culture questions here.
Okay.
How influential do you believe Michelle Obama's positionality in the U.S. has been to the narrativization of the Black woman identity, both in the Black community or outside of it? That's a lot of
that's a good words. Yeah, and I think she's been hugely influential in changing the face of sort of what's possible in terms of how the rest of the world can see Black women. Look, Black women, many of us know our own versions of Michelle Obama. We know lots of badasses who can dress and who can sort of, rock the house. And so she doesn't feel like a unicorn to us, but certainly watching the level of poise that she's had around navigating such a hard space as the first in a world that hates Black women was a joy to watch, even in the moments when it was painful to watch, because clearly she was hurt by many of the things said about her. And I think that she's become a beacon to white folks who are like, see her as fashion icon. And look, I think there's something disruptive about the moments when Black women are allowed to be ladies. Because if you look at the 19th century scholarship, white women didn't call Black women ladies. At best, they called us women, but ladies was a moniker that was racialized and specifically reserved for white women. So for Black women to be able to be ladies is a huge deal. And so I love that. I mean, I think Michelle Obama's dope. I don't always agree with her politically. I think she and Barack sometimes do this respectability thing where they look down on working class Black folks, and I have some challenges with that. But in general, I think she's awesome.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to interview her for a YouTube original series around becoming. So I focused my question around, because I think what she did do really good. I didn't particularly enjoy becoming, but I thought what she did do well, what she's continually done well, is talk about, this reimagining relationships, right? And that she's constantly talked about the importance of her homegirls and her family and her great aunt and all these other connections. She doesn't center, and the ability for her relationship with Barack to be as good as it was largely because they had this diverse range of relationships that buoyed them. So I tried to sneak that, let the Secret Service let me sneak that Black feminist argument in there. Okay, so we're going to move over from Michelle to Hillary and Kamala. So there was some discussion about the disdain of Hillary Clinton and Beyonce. Do you think a parallel argument could be made for Kamala Harris? She wasn't a perfect candidate and had several questionable actions during her time, but it was more controversial than Joe Biden. And they were referencing your Strong Female Leads chapter.
Yeah, I mean, Kamala's interesting because I really loved her when she came out as a senator. I think she's super great in that role. Something didn't land for me with her as a candidate, but I definitely think that she struggled with, or that other folks struggled around her with her strength with the kind of prosecutorial thing on many sides. Woke folks were like, she's a cop. Other folks were like, that kind of interrogating thing that she does when she calls out Biden, all of that, can we trust it? So, I'm on the fence about Kamala, because she just let me say it to you this way. She sort of, I think the challenge for me is that Kamala is not the kind of Black girl that I would see myself hanging out with. Like Michelle Obama, I would like to have a meal with her, a glass of wine with her. Or
Michelle strikes you as real authentic, real round the way, and something about Kamala seems like I'm trying to be there with you, and it's like
Look, and some of that has to do with what does it mean to be the first Black woman and to be a front runner for the U.S. presidency, and to have a clear sense of politics and to be navigating all of these different pieces. So I did think that there was a very specific level of Black woman hatred of her, additional scrutiny, a refusal to acknowledge the ways but I thought the Black community spent a lot of time hating on her too, and not acknowledging the ways that she was actually solidly left in terms of policy, despite the prosecutorial stuff. So she's a complicated figure for me, and that's hard because my general stance is we always ride for Black women, but
Okay, so your chapter Bag Lady, it says, for Black girls, many of us teeter on the brink. If one thing goes wrong, we feel like we just can't make it. Yeah. What is your perspective of the impact of COVID-19 on the Black woman's psyche? And recent evidence suggests that the Black population is disproportionately negatively impacted by this pandemic. Is there a path for institutions, governments, or schools to offer aggressive support? That's kind of a very layered political question.
I mean, yeah, no, that's huge. Yeah, I mean, part of it is really about our kind of precarity, right? That we live in this space where if you're trying to hold together your job, your kids, I talked to a close friend yesterday, and she said, look, they have young babies. They have babies that are under a year old. And she said, so my dude had to leave his job because I work from home and I make more money, and we needed the childcare because we couldn't bring in the person to take care of the kids. And so there's a very delicate sort of financial and social ecosystem. And when one part of that is removed, the question is, how do we cope? Because we need so much additional social support in order to run our lives. So I think I want to just acknowledge that. The thing that I want to have happen around the COVID crisis, just in this immediate moment, and I say this as a fat Black woman, I want people to stop shaming and blaming Black folks for having high blood pressure and diabetes. Mm-hmm. Because you can't have a real political analysis about all of the structural challenges that Black folks face, and then turn around and look at Black people and say, if you just ate better, if you went for a walk more, it's like, well, when was I supposed to do that between the 12-hour job, the children, the partner, the caretaking of the parents,
the access to a good grocery store?
Right. And then then we live in neighborhoods that are subpar and all of that stuff. Like that shaming and blaming, and it's one thing for white folks to do it. It's one thing for them to sort of be oblivious. We don't know why Black people are dying. Black people are dying at alarming rates, but oh my goodness. But it's another thing for Black folks to then be like, we just making bad choices. That's not actually it, and a lot of the research, I'm going to write about this in forthcoming projects. So much of the research says stress makes it hard for Black women in particular to lose weight. Like the stress, the physical stress, our body's responses to stress actually change our metabolic responses to food and to calories. And so Black women will be on these diets and they will lose less weight than white women on the same diets. And that's a stress response. And that's the way that a structure impacts the body. And we are over here sort of yelling at each other about, well, you wouldn't be in this position. And it's like, at the end of the day, do Black lives matter or don't they? Because if they matter, then part of what we mean is there's no caveat to that. There's no qualifier to that. Black people deserve to live, and we deserve to live in a world that doesn't produce health maladies in our bodies and in our communities and then blame us for dying too early from those same maladies.
Okay, so we have two more questions. We have a fun question and then a bit more serious question. So here goes the fun one.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, per your chapter, White Lady Tears, what are your thoughts about the recent tweets about the Karen slur?
Oh, Lord. I mean, Karen gone Karen. And child, that is exactly what I thought. I was like, nobody has time for these white lady tears. And no one cares what Karen thinks. Like, Karen's job is not to show up and act like Karen, and then she won't have any problems. Karen don't want no smoke. So.
Okay, and then our very last question is, Black feminism and Black feminist thought and theory has expanded so much over the course of the last 20 years. That is to say, Black feminist thought is informing all of the fields and all of the things. And I would like to know, what do you see as fertile ground for more Black feminist investigation? So in other words, what would you like to see Black feminists take up?
Yes.
I thought this was a perfect way to end. So
yes, no, this is so good. Yes. Okay. So I really want us to figure out what we mean when we say freedom and we say justice. Like, what does a Black woman's understanding of freedom really mean? What does a Black woman's understanding of justice really mean? I want more books about all of the ways Black women are innovating in digital space, like listening and participating in this group, in this broadcast, knowing about you're doing something so innovative with this work around like a kind of, political education that we are not able to do in the academy. And so I think that there is a lot of work to be done here about how we continue to, I'm very interested in what Black feminism looks like outside of the space of the university, because there was about, 25 to 30 years of Black feminism largely being housed in academic spaces. Mm-hmm. And now, really in the last 10 years, we have made a concerted push to bring it outside the walls of the academy. And I think that, you've got Black feminist co-working spaces and all kinds of, you have Ola Ronke's, the Free Black Women's Library, which is one of the coolest projects. So I want Black women to investigate all of this kind of Black feminist institution building that's happening. I want lots of projects about the return of major Black women MCs to hip hop. There's so many dope Black women rappers right now. And I remember being in the 2000s and the 2010s, I like Nicki, but all we gonna have is Nicki, because I grew up in the 90s where it was we just had everybody. And so now y'all have got so many MCs again. And that's super exciting. And I'm a hip hop generation feminist. So I'm like, come on, y'all, and bring the work about, who's spinning and who's rhyming and who's doing their thing. So there's so much fertile ground.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for being our first author chat. It's actually extremely difficult for me to get people to let me interview them.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible because I'm just on YouTube, and I think people haven't, in the academic world, people are kind of like, girl, what are you going to talk to me about?
Oh, interesting. No, one of my good friends who's a professor actually watches lots of Black women YouTubers. So
Yeah.
when you hit me up, I was like, oh, this is what she means. And so, no. Like, I love this. Y'all are digital innovators. Let me say that when we started the Crunk Feminist Collective, we wanted to be part of a generation of Black women who were innovating digital space because we're always early adopters of technology. And what you're doing is just so hugely important. And sometimes it takes people a long time to catch on because if they don't know it, then they're dismissive. But I know when I see Black girl magic makers and when I see Black girls who are doing some shit that ain't never been done, and I truly appreciate it.
Well,
And
thank you. We really appreciate your time, and I want to say thank you to the Smart Brown Girl Book Club because all those questions, none of those were my questions. They all submitted them, and they did a very thorough job. And thank you for giving us something so innovative to read, and also all your contributions across because you made When Chicken Has Come Home to Roost a lot more applicable in 2020.
I love that book, and I love its author. Yes.
I love it. We tried to get Dr. Morgan here, but we couldn't, the quarantine stuff kind of popped off right when we were trying to book her. So thank you again. We're going to end the chat.
Awesome.
Thank you everyone for joining, and everyone can have a great night. Thank you.